Now, joining us, the former chief of staff for the Environmental Protection Agency during the first Trump administration. You are familiar with her. You have heard her dulcet, melodious tones here on SuperTalk many times. Mandy Gunasekara, how you doing this morning?
I'm good, David. It's great to be with you.
It's great to have you. And, you know, I feel like you probably have a unique perspective to this first 6.5 weeks of the Trump administration, which has been a lot like setting off an entire bag of fireworks in a chicken coop from the outside looking in. It has been chaos, but I think it's probably more controlled than we can see from the outside. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, absolutely. It is strategic and purposeful. And anytime you're riding a ship that has gone the wrong way, it's going to feel a little unsteady, but eventually it's going to hit the right course. And it'll be what President Trump has promised, which is a renewed America. And he's doing this across the board, from the economy, from deregulations, energy development, from security and the border to international stability. He has implemented a policy, and a good way to think about it, honestly, is this isn't just the second term of the Trump administration. This is essentially the 9th year of his leadership, because even during the 4 years that Biden was in the White House, President Trump and his team of folks, as well as conservative groups, some that I worked with, like the Heritage Foundation, we were thinking about, okay, we don't want to waste time if given an opportunity to be back in the White House and throughout the administrative branch again. Let's be ready to go on day one. And so what you're seeing with what seems like a swell of action, and it is seemingly overwhelming, this is the result of 4 years of planning, from lessons learned from those first 4 years, and then figuring out what's gone awry and how to improve this country in all the ways that matter for the everyday American person.
And how to avoid the things that happened the last time around that you might not necessarily have wanted to happen. And to me, one tell that it's going that way this time, that there's a lot more control and a lot more comfort, was during the address to the joint session of Congress Tuesday night. President Trump seemed more relaxed and in control and in command of things than he did at any time during his first administration. He just felt like he was at home holding court, is what it looked like to me, and it was a great thing to see.
Yeah, absolutely. You can see there's a natural ease and a comfort to it. President Trump understands being the president, but not necessarily doing away with his personality. And people either love it or hate it, but doing away with who he is. But he's figured out a really good balance where he does strike that presidential tone. He does represent that strategic path forward. And I really think it's because of what we all collectively went through the past 4 years, but also what he personally went through with regards to the weaponization of the FBI and the DOJ, and going after his family and looking at a lot of the unnecessary hardships and harm caused to those around him and closest to him. He carries that, and he takes it very, very seriously, because we have a wonderful system of government, but President Trump understands, as many of us do, it's something you have to actively fight for and keep. Otherwise, 1 or 2 administrations in a row, and the things that we cherish so much are basic principles of biology or science or regulatory balance, can really go by the wayside.
Well, what he calls common sense. And I'm sorry I got to chuckling because when you mentioned the weaponization of the government, one of many of my favorite moments from the address on Tuesday night was when he discussed that exact topic and said he wanted to eliminate the ability for a sitting president to prosecute his political enemies, and then paused and looked around the room over towards the Democratic side on his right and said, "How'd that work out for you?" That it was those moments that I just loved, and that is part of the level of comfort that I'm talking about. Somebody else might refer to it as he just doesn't really care what anybody thinks. He never has, but it seemed to be on full display Tuesday night.
Yeah, but he's revealing to the American people his sense of humor, and it's been around for a long time. But he approaches things seriously. But even in meetings that I was in that got very tense, very heated, he would always sprinkle in that natural sense of humor, which just it made sense. It could help. It could help ease tensions. He's an amazing negotiator. We all know this. He's the master of the art of the deal, and people get to see that on full display because he's comfortable in his skin. He's comfortable, which he always has been, but now he's comfortable carrying the mantle of the presidency, and he's surrounded himself with people that he implicitly trusts.
And that is so hugely important, especially with everything that's going on. And I'm going to repeat my analogy that I've been using to describe what's happening right now in the federal government. I said it earlier in the show. It's like you have road work going on in your town, in your area, on a road that you use all the time. It's been beat up. There were potholes everywhere. There were water leaks. It was just a horrible experience. Well, then they come in and set up to fix it. The orange and white barrels go up, and it is a headache. It's frustrating. It's ridiculous. It looks so chaotic. You think it'll never end. But at the end of that process, you have the most beautiful glass smooth road you've ever driven down, and things are fantastic. We're in the orange and white barrel stage of this process right now to fix the mess the Biden administration left behind. Is that a fair analogy?
Yeah, I love that analogy. I think it's really good, and the right kind of theme with this administration because it really is rebuilding, basic things that make this country great. And I would urge all the listeners, and I know the Super Talk listeners, they're very good about not falling prey to the traps of mainstream media and buying into heightened states of chaos that you constantly hear from a lot of those left-wing mainstream media allies, but you have to look at the long game. Yeah, things are a little bit unstable right now with potential tariffs or tariffs on Mexico and Canada and how that's actually going to play out. But at the end of the day, we've been getting the short end of the stick from both of those countries in a number of capacities, from trade to immigration, and they rely significantly more on us than we do on them. And so it's time for us to assert that reality and continue to have a good relationship, but we're shifting those dynamics back to where they ultimately should be, which in the long run will be so much better for the country in general, the economy in general, and then we the everyday consumers.
Well, and one thing that illustrates your point perfectly to me, that I'm amazed this hasn't gotten more attention and more press. Canada, they're squawking about these 25% tariffs that President Trump is saying he's going to put into place. Do you know what the tariff is on milk from the United States being imported into Canada? It's over 300%.
Yeah.
And they're going to get upset about 25%. Gee, I wonder who is depending on who the most. That makes it kind of obvious when you find these things out, but they're not talking about that. And I think we need to get that message out more.
No, absolutely. There has been a significant trade imbalance with a country like Canada, and yes, there are friends, but they're kind of like that toxic friend that you've had for a long time. You've given so much to, and they just keep taking. You can maintain some sort of friendship relationship, but it needs to be rebalanced, and that's what's going on right now. I heard from the dairy farmers. The dairy farmers of Wisconsin have been most impacted for years by that high tariff from Canada, and so sure, they're going to be dealing with some short-term hardships as agreements are a little bit up in the air, but in the long term they're ready to not have to deal with a 300% or significant tariff added on to their product, and so they're behind the president 100%. Another stat I heard last night is, did you know that 90% of the population lives within 100 miles of the Canadian population lives within 100 miles of the U.S. border? So again, it goes to show you that the Canadians are much more reliant on the U.S. than the other way around. We can continue that good relationship, but we don't have to receive the short end of the stick.
Well, the Canadians are huddling around the United States for warmth, whether it be security, safety, or financial and economic. They need us, and it's kind of obvious to anybody paying attention. Mandy Gunasekara with us. Can you hang on through the break?
Yeah, sure can.
Yeah, she's got nothing else to do. Yeah, right. That's okay. We'll be done in just a minute, and we'll let you go catch up with your day. We'll continue on mornings here on SuperTalk Mississippi right after this. Keep it here.
This is a trade war, yes. But Canadians are hurt. Canadians are angry. We're going to choose to not go on vacation in Florida or Old Orchard Beach or wherever. We're going to choose to try to buy Canadian products and forego bourbon and other classic American products. And yeah, we're probably going to keep booing the American anthem. But let me tell Americans, we're not booing you. We're not booing your teams. We're not booing your players. We're booing a policy that is designed to hurt us. And we're insulted. And we're angry. But we're Canadian.
It's Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau. Him has a big feeling. You can tell. He made it very clear.
Is hurt.
Yes. Him has a sad.
Mama hadn't taken him to the bank lately and got him a sucker.
And while I'm listening to that, Mandy Gunasekara with us, all I can think about is what you said in the last segment, which is so dead spot on. You were just listening to that friend that borrowed your weed eater and never brought it back, borrowed your lawnmower, never brought it back, borrowed your grill, never brought it back, borrowed money, never paid it back, and you told him enough is enough, I'm cutting you off. That's the speech you get. That is the discussion that you have with them. That was so spot on, Mandy. It's perfect.
Yeah, well, and it's also interesting too. So 60% of Canadian exports come to the United States. So again, they have a lot more to lose if they're going to try to play tough and not try to figure out how to work out some of these issues with the president. Certainly correcting the imbalance we were just alluding to, but also seriously dealing with fentanyl. It keeps coming up that, there were only 43 pounds seized of illegal fentanyl from the northern border compared to, I forget what the number is at the southern, but it's significantly more, 100 times to 1,000 times more. But the problem is that border is so porous, you have no idea what is ultimately just filtering in and is never actually checked. It's not as checked. It's not as monitored as the southern border. And yes, that's because Canada is an ally and a friendly state, but that doesn't excuse them from not having a responsibility in these drugs and other illegal substances flowing into this country that are creating all sorts of havoc and harm to the American people. And that is who President Trump keeps talking about and thinking about when he's talking about controlling the flow and stopping the flow of fentanyl, whether it's the southern border or the northern border. And they really need to get on board with these policies and constructively figure it out instead of throwing these cringeworthy temper tantrums that we see from Prime Minister Trudeau.
Well, that is kind of a liberal go-to attitude, isn't it? Oh, poor me! You're making me feel so bad, and now I'm angry with you. Oh, shut up! Sometimes you just have to do business, and that's where we're at. And what you were talking about with the amount of fentanyl that came across the Canadian border last year, it doesn't sound like much until you break it down and realize it was enough to kill millions of Americans with overdoses. Just that little bit. So you're going to try to argue, well, we only let enough into your country to kill millions of people. It could have been hundreds of millions. So you're welcome. No, that doesn't work. But
right.
That's what they keep trying to sell. With everything that's going on with the Trump administration, all the changes, all the turmoil, all of the stress, let's just call it what it is, what are you hearing from people in Mississippi and other places as well about what's going on? What's their attitude?
Yeah, I I think it depends on where people are on a party line. I think, generally speaking, most conservatives they know President Trump has their back, and so they trust the long game. They really do. And so there's a sense of settling and peace. Frankly, people feel safe once again. They feel that the economy is going to turn around, and you're not going to have to spend a third of your paycheck at the grocery store, and that inflation is going to be dealt with. Again, in the short term, we're just trying to pick up the pieces and put in place new policies to get us on this path. But for the majority of the people I talk to throughout Mississippi, they trust the president's policy. They are grateful for the new direction, and they're going to play the long game. There's also people, I sense this not just in Mississippi, but everywhere, even in Washington, D.C. There's a renewed sense of optimism. People are very excited and hopeful for the future. And that's a lot of folks. Granted, I'll admit I'm often in a bubble. I'm in a bit of a policy political bubble, and so the people who I tend to be around with are involved directly or indirectly with what's going on. But even broader than that, you go to cities like Washington D.C. and it's alive again, and that's the way American cities should be. They shouldn't be empty subway trains, with just crime lurking in every corner, and you don't feel safe. It should be a hustle and bustle of a city that's reflective of the economic opportunities and optimism that make this country so promising and great. And then there is a third bucket of people who are concerned. I mean, I think these are people who are traditional Democrats, and they watch a lot of CNN or MSNBC. And I had a friend come up the other day, and I just said, I really think you should turn some of that off, or if you're gonna watch it, balance it out. Listen, tune into Super Talk. Listen to what people are saying from a slightly different perspective or a more neutral perspective. There's a lot of ways to level it out, but if you are only getting your news from some of these stations that are hell bent on trying to recreate a state of chaos and confusion, then of course you're going to feel that way, because that's what the news is telling you. But the reality is, the bigger picture, it's much better. There is stability, and there is a strategy. There's a strategy that is being implemented, and most of the people I run into, they understand that, and they're excited about it.
Well, and there's one aspect of this. You talk about the optimism, and Washington is alive, and you can feel it. You could feel the collective weight of the world lift off the shoulders of the majority of Americans on election night when they called it for President Trump. But one thing that has played out that no one's really talking about, but I think plays a huge part in it, it's not a tariff, it's not a headline-worthy thing. People finally, for the first time in years, are kind of sharing some of the energy that I was talking about President Trump having in the speech Tuesday night. They have realized they are free to speak their mind without the repercussions they would have gotten even a year ago. They're free to believe what they want to believe, think what they want to think, and expect things to be the way they should be by the tenets of common sense versus the way somebody else has made up in their head is the right way to do it. And I think that has a very uplifting effect on all of the policy, all of everything that we've been talking about. I think that's one of the major engines. People feel free again. You think that's right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and not worried about censorship, whether it's in the form of getting kicked off social media or having social media controlled, or things that we started seeing like debanking, pressure by the federal government at these corporate entities that are really important for day-to-day living, whether it's from a business or a personal finance perspective. There were a lot of people who were being squeezed out and debanked because they were a part of an industry the last administration didn't like. One example is traditional energy sources, coal, oil, and natural gas, or they were a part of innovative new financial mechanisms such as cryptocurrencies, or Bitcoin in particular. You had all of these things happening not too far under the surface that really put people on edge. And what it resulted in was self-censorship. So you're exactly right, Dave. I think you're onto something that's more important and really goes to the essence of our First Amendment, which is freedom of speech. It's so important, not just for personal well-being, but for establishing accountability, which is such a key principle throughout our governing bodies, is that people can say what they think, respectfully, of course. There's still a desire for that. It's not necessarily guaranteed. It depends on who you're around. But nonetheless, people can say how they feel and what they think without these repercussions that were completely anti-American, violated basic rights, and puts people in a state of uneasiness and fear.
To me, the best example of the comparison between, again, I'm using this just as a random yardstick, a year ago versus right now, in terms of what we're talking about with the overall attitude and the undercurrent of confidence and feeling of freedom. Who's more motivated, the people in North Korea or South Korea? Who's living a better life? It's not a direct one-to-one comparison, but it's pretty obvious. If you have someone bearing down on everything you think, see, or hear, it kind of takes the will to live out of people, and that's what we've been going through for a while. Mandy Gunasekara, always enjoy talking to you. You do such a good job, and we are so thankful to have you around, so you're not allowed to go anywhere.
Okay. Well, it's always good to be with you. It really is. I'm happy to come back anytime.
Oh, you really shouldn't say things like that. We will abuse that privilege, I can guarantee you. Thanks, Mandy. You have a fantastic weekend. We will continue on mornings here on SuperTalk Mississippi right after this. Keep it here.